Out on the high plains, the wind tells stories long after people stop talking. Tonight it carries one about a man the world mistook for dead, a rancher named Alton Cade, Boone McGraw to the few who knew him before the silence. He once rode like thunder and shot like lightning, the kind of name that made outlaws look over their shoulders. Then, one winter night, a gang came masked and merciless. By dawn, his wife and little boy were gone, laid beneath a sycamore tree blackened by gunpowder. Cade didn't die that night. He just put his soul away where no one could find it. He traded gun smoke for cattle dust, and the years scabbed over like an old wound. One evening, when the sky looked like bruised fruit, a dust-coated stagecoach rattled up to his gate. Two Apache sisters stepped down in shackles, Luma, young and quick to notice, and Tia, older, with a gaze that could weigh a man without a word. The driver handed over a letter sealed in red wax. Hollis Brentwood, gentleman by dress, gentleman by reputation, and the sort who treated people like coins. The letter called the sisters a gift, the token of gratitude. Cade read it once, then twice, the way you study the mouth of a rattlesnake. Gifts from men like Brentwood come with a price you pay in blood. He cut the chains with a chisel and a steady hand, slid the iron into the same drawer where he kept things he never wanted to see again. "You're not property here," he said. They ate rabbit stew in a house so quiet the floorboards had teachings. For a few days, the world pretended to be kind. He taught them to ride. They taught him to listen. Luma smiled like dawn. Tia didn't smile. She was a barometer, measuring pressure, waiting for a storm. Maybe you've known that hush, the one right before something breaks, the night before the phone call, the breath before a doctor says your name. Cade felt it, the horses felt it, even the stove seemed to breathe shallow. Near midnight, he heard whispering behind the wall. Luma, hopeful. "He isn't like we thought." Tia, iron in her voice. "We still have to find it. If we fail, he kills our parents." A box, buried somewhere on Cade's land. A box that could buy mercy from a man who didn't believe in it. Cade rose slow, drew the old Colt from beneath his bed, and sat in the sisters' doorway with the revolver across his knees. "Tell me everything," he said, with a gravity that pulled truth toward him. In careful breath and halting English, the story came. Brentwood had their parents locked near a played-out mine. Bring in the box, or watch him disappear into the dark of the earth. Cade knew the box. 20 years back, a dying merchant had pressed it into his hands with a warning that stuck like a thorn. Don't open it unless you trust who's watching you die. After that, men came hard and fast, rifles, torches, a night of screaming horses, and left Cade with 2 graves and a scar across his memory. Of all the raiders, one lived, a man he'd cut across the back as the snow began to fall, a scar like a crooked river. Years later, Cade had dragged a well-dressed stranger out from under a wrecked carriage, stitched a long, jagged wound across the man's shoulder blade. The gentleman thanked him with a voice smooth as oil. It took the sisters' whispers for the fact to light up like lightning in a dry sky. Hollis Brentwood, the man with the scar, the man with the smile, the man who sent that letter, was the one who'd run from Cade's burning home that night. Devils do wear silk, and silk remembers. He went to the barn and lifted the floorboards beneath a rusted plow. There it lay wrapped in oilskin and quiet, a small, heavy box that felt like it contained gravity itself. He didn't open it. He knew what every Western knows. Some lids, once lifted, let the past pour out like floodwater. Instead, he set his jaw and built a plan like a carpenter builds a coffin, carefully, with the end in mind. The sisters would carry a decoy, an old tin dressed up to look right from 20 paces. They would name the place and the time. Luma, soft as cotton, would do the talking. T, flint and fire, would hide a knife above the boot. Cade would climb to the ridge with a long rifle and wait. You should know, men of that era trusted the steel they could maintain. A Colt that spoke plain and a Winchester that didn't lie. Out here, machines had honesty if men didn't. Before dawn, Cade stood at 2 stones by a sycamore and said nothing. He'd carried their loss for 2 decades, and he feared not dying. He feared what would be left of him if he lived through the end. Maybe you've wondered that too. If you let go of the anger that kept you upright, do you fall or do you finally stand? The canyon chosen for the exchange was a bowl of bone and light. Every sound doubled and sent back. Brentwood arrived wearing a black duster and a smile that talked good men into bad bargains. 4 gunmen fanned out. Behind them, the sisters' parents were dragged forward, bruised, gagged, and still unbroken in a way the West understands. Luma lifted the decoy from a burlap sack, hand steady, voice steady. Brentwood opened it, saw through the trick, and let the smile fall off his face like a mask off a preacher caught cheating. He gave a small nod. A pistol came up toward the mother's head. The canyon held its breath. Cade's first shot cracked the heat. A gunman folded. The second round took another before panic learned its name. Dust rose. Horses screamed. In the chaos, T moved like a lesson passed down from every woman who ever learned the price of waiting. She drove a blade into the old scar across Brentwood's back. He spun, eyes wide with a memory he'd outrun for 20 years, and found Cade in front of him, gray-eyed and steady as bedrock. The last thing Brentwood heard was the click that comes between a sin and its answer. When the echo quit speaking and the dust lay down, the sisters had their parents in their arms. Cade looked at Brentwood's body without satisfaction. What lived on his face was the absence of something, like walking into a room and forgetting why you came. I've seen that look at funerals, the moment when victory feels like rumor and relief tastes like nothing. Revenge doesn't turn back clocks. It only stops one from ticking.
They burned the dead by necessity, not ceremony, because the desert understands both. By morning, Cade sat by the hearth and told the sisters what lay inside the true box he had never opened. A map drawn in careful ink, folded so often it creased like old bark, and a single Spanish gold coin, the kind minted when the border between greed and glory was a matter of who kept the ledger. The treasure, he said, had been stolen in a time of war by men who profited on other men's graves. It wasn't his to claim. It belonged to the dying merchant's son. Days later, a young man rode up with papers from a lawyer in a nearby city. He had his father's eyes and the look of someone who had learned to live with absence. Cade didn't make a speech. He placed the box in the boy's hands and said, "Don't bury it again. Enough blood's been spilled for it." The boy nodded, throat tight, and rode away carrying weight that suddenly knew its home. Life on the ranch softened into ordinary, which is its own kind of miracle. T planted herbs by the barn, sage, wild mint, and Luma galloped at first light just to hear the world before it woke. Their parents slept without flinching. They cooked. They stitched. They spoke in Apache around the fire, prayers that sounded like rivers when you don't know the words but understand the current. Cade rebuilt a corral board by board, and with each nail driven, the past loosened its grip by a fraction. The sisters told him they wanted to stay. "You gave us back our lives," they said. "Let us help you find yours." And he tried. God knows he did. He moved through the rooms of his own house like a man relearning how to breathe. But some silences are faithful. They don't leave just because you ask nicely. The space inside him, the one hollowed out by grief, didn't want to be filled with anything but truth. So one morning, when the light was the color of unpolished brass, he saddled his horse. He left the tools put away right, the kettle cleaned, the gate mended. He told the sisters they were free, had always been. They already knew. He rode out without looking back, because sometimes looking back is a way of staying, and he needed to go. Out past the cottonwoods, he became another moving point in a world too wide for names. Maybe that's where myth brushes the shoulder of the real. We like to pretend the West was a parade of legends, men with clean morals and cleaner gun belts. Truth is, most folks here learned to live with knots tied inside them. The Apache people endured betrayal dressed up as treaties. Families like Cade's built lives in places where help rode a long day behind. History is made of these small, stubborn survivals. If you've ever kept going because stopping wasn't an option, you understand. Out there, under a sky that doesn't blink, Cade chased a quieter kind of redemption, the kind you don't get from applause, only from choosing not to become the worst thing that ever happened to you. He returned what wasn't his. He refused to own what no one has a right to own. He showed 2 daughters the shape of dignity. In a world that confuses wealth with worth, those are riches you don't declare. And yet the question lingers. What do we do with the boxes we've buried? The memory you won't open, the regret you keep under the floorboards of your mind. Do you carry it until it bends your spine, or do you hand it to the person it belongs to, even if that person is a future you haven't met yet? I remember standing beside a hospital bed, a friend asleep after a hard fight. I held an envelope of things she'd asked me to keep, photos, a ring, a note with a name crossed out. When she woke, the first thing she said was, "Give it back, it's mine to deal with." She was right. Some burdens aren't ours to hoard, even when pain tries to convince us otherwise. Alton Cade, Boone McGraw, the man the West once feared and then forgot, rode far enough that the wind turned his name into weather. He didn't seek forgiveness, he practiced it. Not from God, not from the law, from himself. That's a hard road, but it's the only one that gets you someplace worth staying. When the sun dropped and the world tilted toward blue, a lone rider crossed the line between what was and what might yet be. No ballad followed, no monument rose. The West doesn't need more legends. It needs people who know when to lay the gun down, when to cut the chains, and when to pass the box to the hands that can finally open it. If you listen close, the plains are still telling it. A rancher who wouldn't sell another person's future for his own comfort, 2 sisters who walked out of a cage into their own names, and a box that taught everyone who touched it the difference between treasure and peace. Somewhere beyond the last fence line, Cade disappeared into the horizon. And for once, disappearance wasn't an ending. It was the truest kind of arrival.